All right. First question. Ready, guys? All right. So, first question. Oh my God. Do you guys remember the bird dust model? I hope you do. Excuse me. Good job. It is in the CBD. Yes, it is in the CBD. All right. So, where would you expect to see the fewest public opportunities? Yeah, this is a really hard warm up. Nice. Okay. You got it, but it's okay. The reason why high class residential would have the least public opportunities, it's more like public transportation and such. It's because they're usually found in the suburbs of the city. So that's why there would be less, connection to there. Yes, I'll do one for option F in the future. Option G already happened, and you'll find the material pinned in the chat. So, but if you have any questions about paper one at the moment, you can ask me and I can answer them while we go along. Because this is still like a paper one option. So I'll answer questions about both the option and about paper one in general. Right, guys, answer the question first. Yeah, I'll send you guys the Kahoots later as well. Perfect. Most of you guys got that correct. Good job. We'll talk about sphere of influence throughout the presentation, so don't worry about it. Oh my god. I know a person named Audrey. Of course, no worries. Okay, let's see. Great job, guys. I don't I don't I don't know what these streets are, but just go with it. I I have no clue. Guys, this is not my cahoots. Don't blame me. Blame the person who made this. Nice. Okay, good job. Everyone who answered got it correct. I don't see why the rest of you guys aren't answering though, but it's awesome. Okay, most of you got that correct. Just good. All right, next question. My bad, guys. I really, my bad. Blame my laptop. All right. I hope this one is more on time. Hmm. Okay, great. Now let's move on to the final question. Okay. I think we can begin now. It was kind of a good refresher. I'm sure once we get into it, we'll all kind of understand the content a bit more. Okay, let's begin. So what you'll notice in in option E is there is a very recurring theme of cost benefit analysis. So cost benefit analysis basically means it doesn't mean cost money wise or financially wise, but it can also mean sacrifice. Okay. So you're going to see a lot of cost benefit analysis as we go forward with multiple case studies that I'll be giving you. But just think of it as more of sacrifices or kind of, or what, yeah, more sacrifices when you think of cost, not financial cost. Okay. So this document has a bunch of case studies as well as, graphs. So I'm gonna keep this as visual as possible. So, what is leisure? Of course, leisure is the different types of activities people participate in. So, watching TV is a leisure activity. Participating in sport is. Reading books is. And it's it puts you in a specific state of mind. So it helps you engage in pleasurable activities. And it's also the amount of free time one has away from work. And these pursuits can be informal, formal, short term, or long term. And these can also include your hobbies. However, leisure time is not equal for people. Of course, it depends on your wealth, your gender, and personal care includes self care. So, sleeping, eating, drinking, and so on and so forth. And as you can see here, different countries have a different form of work-life balance. And so this is a work-life balance index. So as you can see here, these are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These are the top 8 countries with the best work-life balance in the world, meaning that they allow their employees to both, work and enjoy their free time off. And these are countries with the worst ones. As you can see, the rating is a bit much lower than than the other ones. But then, what are the factors that impact leisure time? So in higher income countries, they have more opportunity for day trips, where people fly to another city for a day, and paid activities and paid hobbies are common activities. What that means is, for example, you know how pickleball is a really, pickleball or paddle is a really trending sport right now as a high, it's a really trendy sport. And so people in high income countries have the ability to pay for a private trainer, for example, or for tennis or for football. They'll have the ability to pay for, someone to coach them. However, in lower income countries, you have fewer opportunities um, that have a cost. So, for example, there are fewer opportunities to paying for because of wait. There are fewer opportunities because of having to pay for a lot of these activities. So, for example, paying for the gym is seen as more of, a hassle for most people in lower income countries. And also, but however, for some indigenous people, for example, leisure time activities may include storytelling and traditional music. And in gender, women generally have more leisure time in Western nations. And Europe and the USA, men have more than 9 hours per week, and they have more leisure time than women. And women's status in society also may affect how much leisure time they have. And for age, higher income countries, in higher income countries, leisure is targeted for those who have retired. So, you have retirement facilities, you have your 401k, you get to, use that money, spend it however you want. And of course, the growth of leisure time is the result of the following factors. So, developments in technology, such as washing machines and freezers, means that people spend less time in the house. And there's also an increase in self employment and flexi time. So, people who work on their laptops or work hybridly, not in the office anymore. And you have the growth of leisure activities, you have an increase in disposable income. Disposable income is income that, like extra income, that you can use for your own miscellaneous activities. You have an increase in wages, earlier retirement, reduction in the length of the working week, reduction in the length of the working day, growing desire by the wealthier population to escape the pressures of urban living, and also, wide body jet planes, larger transportation methods, and that will widen economies of scale and also time space convergence. And also, there's an increase in advertising, and social media and influencers also promote leisure activities. So, how are these tourist activities categorized? So, there are many types of them, and these are the main kinds. You have niche tourism, ecotourism, heritage tourism, sustainable tourism, mass tourism, medical tourism, and adventure tourism. As you can see, they all have different definitions, and they all have different examples to them. We'll go in them a bit more in depth. But for example, medical tourism, the funniest one is, of course, men going to Turkey for hair transplants. So that's no, that's a form of medical tourism. And then for ecotourism, for example, you go for a safari. So that's more of an ecotourism. So you go to, like, you travel to sustainably managed areas. And then, for example, adventure tourism is going, for example, to go bungee jumping or to go cave diving. That's adventure tourism. And so you have, they can be categorized in many ways, and they also have resources. So tourist resources can be divided into two categories. So primary resources are pre-existing attractions for tourism, such as the climate, cultural, and heritage sites. And secondary resources include entertainment and accommodation. So what that means is, for example, let's look at Rio de Janeiro, for example. Rio de Janeiro has a beautiful beach. So and it has a really nice heat. So that in itself is primary tourism. However, when a resort is built over there and then you have tourist attractions there, or you have tourism services there that will bring you from your hotel to the beach, that is called secondary tourism. So it's services or attractions built, it's attractions built above the pre-existing, above the pre-existing features. So in urban areas, primary resources are very usually found in the CBD, and secondary resources may be spread more evenly through the urban area, but many hotels and restaurants tend to be focused in the central business district. And some secondary resources might be found on the rural urban fringe, such as theme parks. And in rural areas, the landscape itself, so the natural features, is the primary resource. And those are, but there are also ancient ruins, castles located throughout the landscape. And for rural areas, secondary resources tend to be built around the primary resource. So, for example, a castle may have a cute cafe or a souvenir shop. All of that is secondary tourism. And sports categorized in 10 groups, as you can see here. And some sporting activities can be more expensive. So, for example, swimming in a pool really usually requires a swim membership, and outdoor bowling, which I've never really heard before, it needs a dedicated site. And also the popularity of sports really differ by country. It is measured by how many people participate or the number of people interested. As you can see here around the world, you can see what sports are really famous where. As you can see, of course, football is the most popular sport of them all. But then you have cricket, that's really important. It's really popular as well. Or you have table tennis in China, you have wrestling in Mongolia, so on and so forth. So as you can see, popularity really also plays a factor. And we'll say how later. So participation, of course, in sports can be either individual or through groups. And so there is a positive correlation between economic development and participation in sports, because as countries develop, there is a very big change in leisure activities. Because as a person's income increases, a television is one of the first things they want to buy. They want to buy that flat screen TV, you know what I mean? um, and here are the kinds, or like, I'm not sure, this is maybe when countries started owning televisions, but as you can see, they all kind of began owning them at a similar time, and some began to get them a bit later. And in newly emerging countries, people often work longer hours, so there's very little time for leisure activities. And in higher income countries, leisure activities really vary with age and the stage in the family life cycle. So this is what it means. So you have number 1 to number 5. So this is the family life cycle. So step 1 is few financial burdens and purchases basic furniture and budget holidays. Number 2 is you buy sensible furniture and you're better off financially because you have no children. Number 3, children. And their assets are very low. They don't really contribute to anything. And women may return to work after the children are born, so income may increase. And 5, you get more income once you've developed further in your job. And then 6, once everyone leaves your home and you're an older person, you may become more lonely and have a greater need for affection. This basically is like the different steps in your life. So 1 is when you're young, you're married, you're in love, you're moving into a new house. And number 6 is you're old, you're retired, and your kids are all moving away. So that's the the range. And depending on where you are in life, you'll engage in different kinds of activities, of course. So the moment you all love, case studies. So the first case study is Saudi Arabia. And over 2/3 of Saudi Arabia is under 35 years old. And so to encourage tourism, Saudi Arabia now has an e-visa to simplify it. And Saudi Arabia made sports a very big priority in 2016 as part of the 2030 Vision Program. And so there are 3 main objectives, of course: achieve a 40% participation rate, and also grow and empower the sports community. Saudi Arabia has invested $1.8 billion in the sports industry. And in 2019, Saudi Arabia spread awareness of more than 50 sports, and mass participation increased to 23%. And Saudi Arabia is now home to 9 international sporting events, such as WWE Super Showdown and Formula E. And Saudi Arabia is also undertaking the construction of a new $100 million Olympic Village in Riyadh. And so here are the factors for engagement of sports in Saudi Arabia. So you have historical constraints, because traditionally Saudi Arabia had strict societal and cultural norms that limited women's participation in public sports and recreational activities. And women face legal and societal restrictions. And so their accessibility to sports facilities and events was highly regulated. And for recent reforms, Saudi Arabia has implemented a series of reforms aimed at increasing women's participation, and the government introduced initiatives to encourage physical activity amongst women. And for sports education facilities, efforts have been made to enhance sports education for women in schools and universities, and sports facilities for women have been established. International participation in Saudi Arabia has started sending female athletes to international competitions such as the Olympics. However, one challenge is conservative attitudes continue, and the need for continued cultural change does remain. And there are increased opportunities for women to engage in sports and leisure, and they are expected to expand further. And then a contrasting case study here is the United States. Because the United States has of course, we know the population, and the engagement in physical activity has been around 73% over the last 2 decades, so it's really high. And there's a link between income and activity levels. So in the US, people with low income are less likely to engage in physical activity. However, people with higher income levels are more likely to engage in physical activity. And so engagement in sport and leisure in the USA, we see that what impacts it is, for example, leisure time increases. So, for example, American adults have gained 4 to 9 extra hours per week. So, of leisure time because they have decreased the working hours. And there's an impact on lower wage earners because they've experienced a significant increase in leisure time. And single person households are very predominant in the United States. And there's a lot of income inequality growth because with the wealthiest 1% in the United States accounting for over 20% of the wealth in 2010, which is a lot. So there's a big financial inequality in the United States. There's also a big black-white income gap. So a median Black household income is 61% of a white income household in 2018. And there's a lot of ethnic variations in leisure activities. And there's a lot of shift to individualized leisure. So team sport participation in the United States has declined. And there's a lot of student leisure habits. So students spend 15 hours watching the television per week and about 5 hours participating in organized events, and so on and so forth. So, what are the factors affecting personal participation in sports and tourism? So, one's personal choice to participate in sport and tourism. One, there's affluence. So, affluence is someone's wealth, and that impacts their participation. For example, in the UK, richer or more affluent UK individuals enjoy elite sport facilities. You have, for example, golf is really popular, and they often visit luxury resorts, and they have a demand for top quality sports gear. So, and they also own luxury assets like yachts and, supercars. That's how and that affluence allows them to participate in different kinds of leisure activities. And for example, you also have gender because the participation of women in sports is much lower than those of men. And women often spend more time on childcare and household tasks, which restricts the time available for sports and leisure activities. And there may also be cultural factors. So, as we said earlier, women in Saudi Arabia have previously experienced challenges. However, there have been aims to boost so. And so, hopefully, in the future, it's a provision that more women will participate in leisure activities. Excuse me. And it also depends on your stage in life. So children and younger people will participate in sports more than those who are working. And those who are retired will also spend more time than those working as well. One sec. All right, so there's also personality. So it's whether you're an introvert or extrovert may affect your participation in team sports and team leisure activities. And introverts may want to do more quiet activities. And also the place of residence does impact it. So for example, to ski, you need to have reliable snow. To surf, you need waves. And for fishing, you need healthy rivers. So the end of 8.1. Before we move on to 8.2, does anyone have any questions about 8.1? So like the section I just mentioned. Any questions so far? All right, awesome. Then I'll move on. Perfect. So 8.2 is tourism and sport on a local scale. So a tourist hotspot is an area that attracts a very large number of tourists, and it's also called a honeypot. And there are various factors that determine whether an area is a hotspot. So for example, the climate. So hot and sunny weather in the summer can lead to seasonality of tourism, which means people will only come in the summer or when the weather is favorable. And there's also the culture of an area, such as the clothing, the food. It may encourage more people to visit. You have natural landscapes, you have government investment, and you have large sporting events such as the Olympics. To be a successful hotspot, though, it's most likely that the location will have a range of accommodation, of transport options, public utilities, and investment from governments. Hotspots may be seasonal. That means tourism peaks at particular times of the year, or diurnal, which means tourism may peak at specific points of the day. So, for example, if you go to Ibiza, Ibiza has really good nightclubs. So tourism will peak at, in the nighttime so that people can go out and party. But then in the daytime, while everyone's hungover and sleeping, then you have a different issue. Then that's the diurnal difference. So here, for example, is New York, which is it's definitely an urban tourism hotspot. As you can see, New York City received over 56.5 million visitors in 2022, and international visitors make up around 13% of the total visitors, and 410,000 people are employed in tourism in the city of New York. And popular tourist attractions, of course, include Times Square, Central Park, Statue of Liberty, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And of course, the primary resources include historical monuments, vibrant cultural scenes and museums, and secondary resources have developed across New York to provide for tourists, including hotels, restaurants, and modern museums. But however, there were some challenges. For example, the Brooklyn Bridge was closed twice in 2018 due to overcrowding, and there's overselling of access to the Statue of Liberty, over 400 feet queue of people who wanted to access the Empire State Building in June of 2019, and tourism is seasonal in New York due to the climate with the low season in February. In 2020, tourism declined by a whole 65% due to COVID. However, they have a lot of strategies. For example, they have infrastructure development, which means that the city advertised a wide range of tourists with its variety of transport and over 120,000 rooms available in hotels. Marketing campaigns, for example, New York City and companies' marketing campaigns like New York City Homecoming provided a week of concerts in Central Park to encourage tourism. And for example, cultural events, you have New York Fashion Week and you have the Tribeca Film Festival. You have sustainable initiatives where you have bike sharing with City Bike and zero emission buses. You have digital innovation with smart tourism apps such as Sit or Squat, which monitor the cleanliness of toilets in the city. You have Rice New York, which offers replica visits on the first subway trip from 1904, which is an interactive gallery and it's also a flight simulation. So New York's tourism strategy also aims to increase the number of international travelers. For example, they want to launch a halal travel guide for the city, and they want to create multicultural content hubs. And also, they also want to decrease seasonality. So New York City will encourage tourism in the winter as well as in the summer. They want to invest over $20 billion in the major airports. They want to increase transport, regenerate public spaces, and increase economic impact. So what about growth of rural tourism hotspots? So you have Yosemite, which I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but it's okay. Or Yosemite, something like that. It's a national park in California, and it has been a protected area since 1864. And the primary resource is the landscape and ecosystems. However, there have been secondary resources that have been built above it. So the park covers 1,200 miles, and this park is one of 63 parks governed by the U.S. National Park Service. And Yosemite National Park was first protected in 1864, and they receive over 4 million visitors per year. And special passes for entry are needed to visit due to the large number of visitors. So there are various tourist attractions. There's accommodation. There are campsites, hotels, lodges, and transportation is available. And private cars can also be used if you have a permit. So what are the management strategies of Yosemite? So you have an annual visitor capacity, so that prevents overcrowding and possible environmental damage. You have shuttle services, which reduces individual car traffic and lowers emissions. You have partnerships to ensure that the sites are accessible to everyone. You have habitat restoration. You have ecosystem studies, where scientific research is carried out. You have fire management, and you have visitor education, where many programs and exhibits take place to show how different groups of people have contributed to the area. So you have, of course, sphere of influence of sporting and tourist facilities. The sphere of influence is the area from which a facility or an attraction draws the supporters. So small playgrounds have small thresholds where only local people can visit. However, sports centers have a much larger threshold, which provide opportunities for a large number of people to participate in central locations. So people will visit from a much wider area to come. And the range is the maximum distance people will travel to use a facility. And the minimum number of people needed for a facility is to be viable is known as the threshold population. And the larger the population of a city, the more opportunities there will be for sports franchises to operate, which is known as a sports hierarchy. So, so here is the hierarchy of sports facilities and different kinds of settlements. So in a village up to 1,000 people, you would have, for example, a mobile library or community hall where you could have exercise classes such as yoga, cricket, and bowling. And in a capital city, you'd have, it's a big range because then you'd have much more activities such as a court, dedicated areas for golf, special ed sports. And then as the settlement size increases, you will have much more demand on much more kinds of sporting activities. And so sphere of influence, what are factors affecting the sphere of influence? That is transport, whereas good transport links increase the sphere of influence. You have competition with other facilities, services provided by a facility, and local population characteristics. So urban areas are also very important for tourism because they can be an entry point for other tourist destinations. And you also have a wide range of accommodation, which can suit all budgets, from hostels to five-star hotels. However, remember that the hierarchy of a sport is really based on traditional Western examples. So different areas, different parts of the world, different cultures will consider some activities more important or more valuable than others. So it really depends on where you are. So let's look at an example of a national sports team. So for example, we'll take the case study of netball in Australia. Netball is played with two teams, and worldwide it's played in 80 countries and has over 20 million players, and it's recognized as an Olympic sport. And it was introduced in Australia, and it's the most popular women's sport in Australia with over 1 million players play netball worldwide. And so Tasmania also joined, and the organization became officially known as Netball Australia. The organization has a governing body which has representatives from every state and territory in Australia. And the National Domestic League in Australia is called the Suncorp Super Netball, and the average salary for a player is 89,221 Australian dollars. So what is the location distribution of them? Supporters are very largely drawn from each of the Australian states. When supporters move away to university or for a job, this may extend the sphere of influence. So in 2023, over 265,000 fans attended the match during the home and away season. Games are televised, of course, and they're also televised on sports stations and around the world or on YouTube. And more teams are located in the east of Australia because it's where the main urban areas are. So as you can see here, this shows you where the location of the main netball teams are. As you can see, most of them are in the east side where you have these teams, and then you have very few that are in, the direct south or the direct north. So you also have different venue sizes, the capacities. So as you can see here, the largest is the Swifts, who play in Sydney, and their capacity is 18,000 people. However, you also have, for example, the Melbourne Vixens, who have a capacity of 10,500. So a very large carrying capacity means that they have room for multiple tourists to come at a time. And then, but you also have temporary sites of leisure. So some leisure sites are temporary. For example, you have Glastonbury Festival, or festivals in general are examples of a temporary site. So Glastonbury Festival is located at Somerset, England. It's in the south. And the village is in a rural area with gently sloping land, and the festival takes place on 800 acres of land. Transport are along the routes, but there are limited connections to the farm. And it's the largest greenfield music and performing festival in the world. And in 2024, the price of a ticket is £360, and there are 210,000 tickets available to purchase. and there are temporary facilities. And here is a cost and benefit analysis of Glastonbury. So, an economic disadvantage was the UK had to invest more money in providing services and facilities, and there must be enough security to deal with drug crimes and a huge number of tourists. However, an advantage is UK benefits financially, of course, because people will buy tickets, food, and accommodation, and it also encourages government funding, and businesses, clubs, and charities are also dependent for revenue. Some social downsides are the community does not benefit from the event because it's very self-contained that provides all the services, so people can't make purchases outside. And local people may avoid the area during festival times to avoid traffic and overuse of local facilities. However, a positive thing is safe environments, of course, with secure safety procedures. And there is reduced crime rates because of a cashless society where people bring their phones to pay instead of just cash. So they're less prone to being robbed. And of course, you have environmental impacts, which is soil degradation, of course, due to footpath, high energy consumption, and noise pollution. However, the good thing is you have certified renewable energy use. Participation remains intense, so that reduces the amount of carbon dioxide emission, and it saves 600 tons of greenhouse gas emissions with the amount of trees planted through the sink in carbon dioxide. So that is 8.2. Lots of talking, but does anyone have any questions before we move on to 8.3? And don't worry, if I will send out these case studies as well. So this entire document will be shared in case you still have, or if you still want to look through the case studies. But does anyone have any questions? All right, if not, we can move on. So we saw tourism at a national scale. So now we'll look at tourism at an international scale. So, so at an international scale, you have niche tourism. So what is niche tourism? No, niche tourism, as we said before, is very special interest tourism. It's specific tourism caters to specific kind of people. So, for example, you have ecotourism, agro-tourism, adventure tourism, heritage tourism, dark tourism, which I don't know what dark tourism is actually, but it's okay, and movie location tourism. So, we'll talk about those in depth, of course, but what are the challenges of those? Because you have high competition from other tourist destinations, which could affect tourist numbers. And of course, some niche tourist activities can fall out of fashion. So, for example, if a movie or a TV show was really popular at one point, but now it's dying in popularity, it isn't really a guaranteed sustainable tourism option. And ooh, and of course, and it's a very big spectrum, so you don't know what to expect because in some areas there's less economic advantage because of low visitor numbers. However, in other areas there are very high visitor numbers, so that which impacts the environment negatively. So, adventure tourism, like we said before, adventure tourism attracts high value customers who are willing to spend money on their holidays. So, for example, climbing Mount Everest is a very good example of adventure tourism because it's a really expensive activity because you'd have to pay for the equipment, a license perhaps, someone to take you there, the flights, the accommodation. However, not everything is expensive. You also have local economies where you have 66% of the revenue spent on adventure tourism remains within the destination. And it also encourages sustainable practices, which is good because it involves local communities and it promotes environmental protection for future use. So who participates in it though? You have couples, you have solo travelers, and you have group travelers who make up 80% of adventure tourists. And those aged 51 to 60 make up the largest group of adventure tourists. And according to the World Tourism Organization, 85% of visitors social media groups. So what are the types? You have soft adventure tourism, which is relatively safe and hardly requires skill, which is camping, canoeing, fishing, hiking, so on and so forth. You have hard adventure tourism, which requires more experience and skill, which is like caving, climbing, and trekking, which are all examples. So, an example is the Brecon Beacons. So, this is the National Show Wave Centre for Whales in the Brecon Beacons National Park. It's one of Wales's top attractions. And there are 3 different caves. I'm not going to pronounce those. And the cave has 40 feet high waterfalls. And in Bone Cave, apparently there are the remains of 42 humans, which is insane. And Bike Park Wales offers a variety of bike tours. You have Black Mountain Gliding Club, which offers tours 970 meters above sea level. And let's move on. So, movie tourism. Movie tourism is where many people like visiting places that are shown in television or in movies. For example, you have the United Kingdom, you have Downton Abbey, you have Harry Potter, you have Game of Thrones. Those were all in the United Kingdom. New Zealand has Avatar and Lord of the Rings. USA has Gossip Girl, Vampire Diaries, Friends, Spider-Man, so on and so forth. So, movie tourism in Georgia. There have been various impacts caused by movie tourism, and Georgia is a very good example. So, Georgia is known as the Hollywood of the South due to a film tax credit program in 2005, and Douglas County is home to the Douglas Film Trail, which highlights filming locations of various movies and TV shows. And Georgia gained over 15,000 jobs in the movie industry between 2011 and 2021 because they received many projects such as Stranger Things, Marvel, Hunger Games, Walking Dead. So that's a lot of big names. And so in 2022, the Georgia Screen Entertainment Coalition reported that there were nearly 60,000 jobs and more than $3.5 billion in labor value in the entertainment industry. And so heritage tourism is sometimes referred to as cultural tourism. It's when people are attracted to a place to see their historical monuments or their historical buildings, visit museums, or experience the cultures and traditions. So, for example, you have Machu Picchu in Peru. It's along with Cusco, which show the heritage of the Incas in Peru. And it's a site of archaeological importance, and it has been a World Heritage Site. And it's one of the new 7 wonders of the world. And the site is, of course, 2,430 meters above sea level on the eastern slopes of the Andes. And here is the cost and benefit of tourism at Machu Picchu. So, a good thing about Machu Picchu tourism is that you get a lot of revenue. It's very significant revenue from entrance fees, guide tours, and the sale of souvenirs and local products. And revenue can really contribute to the maintenance and preservation of Machu Picchu. You have job creation, economic diversification, and infrastructure development. However, the downside is you'll have infrastructure strain. So a sudden surge in tourism can strain local infrastructure, which leads to issues such as traffic, waste management problem, and pressure on public services. You also have economic dependence on and over-reliance on tourism. You have leakage due to the multiplier effect, which takes place when money does not stay in the host country. And you also have tourism is really volatile. As you can see by COVID-19, COVID-19 really did halt tourism around the world, showing how volatile it is. And socially, it encourages pride for Peruvians and encourages celebration of and cultural events. However, you also have abandonment of local cultures as local people become influenced by Western tourists, and you have an increase in local crime. Environmentally, tourism has conserved the local environment because of the government. However, visitor numbers have been increasing, which causes environmental issues such as footpath erosion and waste pollution. So, what is the role of transnational corporations in tourism? So, I remember someone here had a question about this, an essay question about this. So here, listen up to this one. So in many LICs, tourism is used to stimulate economic growth. And tourism contributes to $9.5 trillion to the global GDP. So many LICs have primary resources. Those are beaches, wildlife, mountains, heritage, and so forth. Secondary resources such as hotels and other tourist facilities are also available. However, for some LIC destinations, it's really difficult for individual tourists to book a holiday independently and therefore rely on tour companies. And so infrastructure isn't really complete in LICs, which means that LICs rely on transnational corporations who therefore develop the tourist industry. So a transnational corporation, of course, is a company that operates in at least two countries, and TNCs invest in both primary resources and secondary resources. And TNCs have led to cheaper international travel. So here are some examples. So you have the Hilton hotels, and it's one of the largest hotel chains in the world. And Hilton has sponsored the McLaren Formula One team, and it employs 159,000 people globally and has approximately 1.12 million hotel rooms worldwide. Thomas Cook, for example, is a British company where, sorry, it's a company that offers package holidays, and it also employs 21,000 people worldwide. And it's an airline which collapsed in 2019, however, which left over 600,000 people stranded abroad. And a stakeholder is someone with an interest in a particular area. So in tourism, stakeholders can be individuals, groups, and organizations such as TNCs. And there are 5 main areas of TNC involvement. You have cruise lines, airlines, tour operators, hotels, and travel agents. So for example, what are the costs and benefits of transnational corporations? So transnational corporations involvement improves tourists because tourists can choose branded hotels that they will be familiar with, such as the Marriott or Holiday Inn, which can be found at many places worldwide. And the Marriott hotels are similar in style around the world, which means that people may want to choose a hotel that they recognize. However, the bad thing is lack of choice because large hotel chains now have spread into countries around the world. Therefore, hotel prices can increase because people are willing to pay more for a recognized brand. Tourism employees at the destination. So people who are employed may receive regular income from TNCs and employment benefits, and you have development of employee skills. TNCs often franchise their hotels, which means that people or companies can purchase the name of well-known hotel companies, which increases brand awareness. And if a TNC withdraws from the country, however, employees will be left without work, and companies who franchise do not necessarily treat employees as well as if they were working for the company directly. Therefore, you also have leakage because money goes to the TNCs as profit and not for the country itself. And you also have local people because taxes generated are used to create new infrastructure. However, some would agree that where Western tourisms visit new destinations, then the locals may lose their culture. For employees in the headquarters, TNCs such as Booking.com have shown their interest in social responsibility. However, women's positions in the company do match those of men. And for environmentalists, you have Marriott International, which is a TNC, have used the UN SDGs as part of their environmental responsibilities. However, TNCs also spend millions on marketing each year, which encourages tourists to fly to many destinations, which increases carbon emissions. So, what are, in general, the costs and benefits of tourism? So, you have many benefits of tourism. Tourism can provide economic development for lower income and emerging nations. Tourism is sometimes regarded as an export, and national tourism strategies are government policies to encourage tourism. Also, tourism can benefit unemployment levels, and tourist jobs include catering, transport, guiding, accommodation working, food production, and construction. Tourism can also provide new skills for people, such as learning multiple languages. The multiplier effect takes place when income generated by local people is circulating back into the local economy. So, what is the multiplier effect, as you can see here? It's when money goes from travelers as they want to buy modes of transport, as they spend their money on types of tourism, into sales, employments, wages, and taxes. So what that means is that travelers will then help boost the local economy. And what are the costs, though? You have leakage. So due to foreign ownership of many aspects of the secondary resources, these hotels will make much of the money, and that money does not remain in the country itself. And you have employment for local people is often low skilled and very poorly paid, and price increases occur in local businesses as tourists can pay higher prices. You have inequality, and you also have increased water usage. And land is also used for building more resorts and more hotels instead of other infrastructure. So, what about tourism in small island developments? Small islands often rely on tourism for economic development. And there are benefits because manufacturing is unlikely to be possible there, and tropical islands have many natural attractions, such as beaches, rainforests, and coral reefs. Tourism is not really restricted there, and direct and indirect employment does provide jobs in the area. However, there are very negative impacts because it can be negatively, their economy can be negatively affected by global pandemics, and transport and accommodation costs to go there is really high. For example, you have tourism in Bermuda. So, Bermuda is a very popular tourist spot because it's a very gorgeous area. But there you have, for example, you have golf courses, you have museums, snorkel parks, you have an international airport, you have a fantasy cave, an aquarium, a museum, a botanical garden, and you have a national gallery. So in 2022 in Bermuda, tourism accounted for around 3% of its GDP. And Bermuda is an archipelago of 7 main islands and some 150 other islands and islets. The islands have a subtropical climate, and there are no rivers or lakes in Bermuda. Therefore, water supply is through rainfall harvesting or desalination. So each year, there's an average of 405,000 visitors who arrive on cruise ships to Bermuda. And in 2023, 505,000 visitors in total visited Bermuda, compared to 605,000 in 2019. And so, according to tourism figures reported by the Bermuda Tourism Authority, the reasons for tourism, of course, are vacation, destination weddings, sporting events, business, and visiting family and friends. And so, over 3/4 of visitors are from the USA, Canada, UK, and Europe, and the remaining are from other places. So, what is the economic importance? Tourism is the second largest industry after insurance and reinsurance. And there is little agriculture, and therefore the government recognizes the importance of tourism. And in 2022, the average spent per air visitor rose from 2019. So, there is a vulnerability of tourism in Bermuda, however, because it's vulnerable to external shocks because it was, for example, impacted by COVID-19 because the island had to shut down. You had rising sea levels, and Bermuda is also affected by hurricanes, and also temperatures are increasing, which is affecting Bermuda's coral reefs and tourism activities linked to them. You also have vulnerability to internal limitations. So the average tourist consumes more water than the average Bermudian. So Bermuda uses rain tanks to collect rainwater for drinking. However, that means that the amount of solid waste pollution produced by tourists is really high, and salaries paid to local people tend to be low paid in season. However, there have been ways to reduce Bermuda's vulnerability, such as promoting electric vehicles, development of heritage experience, providing a focus on key sports, setting up a Bermuda's own airline, investing in hotels, and Bermuda hotels have signed up to a guarantee scheme against hurricanes. So there have been many plans for reducing vulnerability. So, what are the factors affecting the hosting of international events? So hosting an international event such as the Olympics or the World Cup is really expensive. And countries lobby to try and persuade organizers that they are the best location. However, when a country makes a bid to run the event, they must ensure that they are successfully able to carry out the building project and host the games. This includes economic factors, and the following infrastructure would be needed for international games, such as stadiums, training facilities, hotels, and public transport system. Unfortunately, there have been accusations of corruption in organizations, and there are various political factors involved which needs to be taken account of. For example, the government will be the primary source of funding and therefore will need to allocate public funds to large infrastructure buildings. And governments must ensure that they can ensure adequate safety for visitors, and diplomatic relations can influence the hosting of the games, such as when the USA and Soviet Union boycotted each other's games in the Cold War. Countries usually have a cultural link to the event being held, of course. However, the event may be used to raise the profile of a sport in a country. For example, Qatar does not really have a football tradition, but it had the 2022 World Cup over there. So, what are the advantages and disadvantages? So, the advantage is hosting an international event brings increased tourism and it also brings increased temporary job opportunities, and it also brings infrastructure development. However, for example, the Montreal hosted the Olympic Games in 1976 and made a loss of over $1 billion, which took many years to pay off. And political and worldwide exposure, hosting an international event increases a country's visibility on a global scale and promotes the country for further tourism opportunities. However, there were many criticisms of worker abuse in Qatar before the 2022 World Cup. For sports developments, aspires new youth to try new sports that may lead to more international sports persons in the future. However, many sports do not continue with funding after the event has finished. So, here is a case study of the Netball World Cup in South Africa in July and August of 2023. It was hosted in Cape Town, South Africa. So the final was held over there. New Zealand and Australia have dominated the World Cup, of course, and there are 16 teams who participate in the International Cup. And the cost and benefit was the arena at Cape Town's International Convention Center was not always full. Therefore, many tickets remained unsold. The cheapest ticket was for 500, which was too high for many local people to attend, and much higher than the Women's T20 Cricket World Cup, which was also held in South Africa. However, global coverage of the Sports 60 Games were available, and it was the first time the event has been held on African soil, and the local hospitality industry reported positive increase in occupancy rates, and the Netball World Cup in 2023 was named the best sporting event of the year at the Sports Business Awards in London. However, also Cape Town's International Convention Center is not a traditional netball center, so it had to be adapted, and a taxi strike took place during the World Cup, which limited the number of transportation options available from the hotels to the stadium. However, all clothing, hats, and bags used by support crew and for sale as official merchandise at the main tournament were locally produced. And more than 400 volunteers, officials, and support staff were trained and responsible in event hosting, and nearly $2 billion was raised from sporting events in 2023, which included the Netball World Cup. So, before we continue to the last chapter, does anyone have any questions about managing tourism on a worldwide global scale? If not, I'll move on to the last quarter. Okay, awesome. If we have no questions, we can move on to the last section. So, what is that managing tourism and sport for the future? So we have to assure how sustainable tourism is. So the carrying capacity can be broken down into three elements. You have physical carrying capacity, you have ecological carrying capacity, and you have perceptual carrying capacity. So what do those mean? Physical carrying capacity is the measure of absolute space available. For example, car parks spaces available. Ecological is the level of use of the environment that can sustain without damage, and perceptual is the level of crowding a tourist will put up with before they think it is too crowded and they want to leave. So, Butler's model of tourism argues that tourist destinations will eventually exceed their carrying capacity, and this will result in either adaptation or decline. So, how about management of tourism hotspots? So you have very sustainable management, and that can be achieved by either increasing the carrying capacity or limiting tourist numbers. So a very popular case for this is Venice. Venice has a very historical urban center, and it's 700 hectares long. And tourism patterns are not equal in Venice because you have an annual turnover of 8 million people. However, most tourists arrive in the summer and on weekends. And so according to some research, over 110,000 visitors visit Venice every day in the summer. And research from 2019 suggests that the carrying capacity should be 55,000 tourists per day. It's clear that the carrying capacity is being reached in Venice from the tourist numbers that are visited. And in 2023, 270 cruise ships visited Venice, bringing 600,000 day trippers. And how about management? The government has started to charge people to enter the city through the square's gates at a fee of $4.50. And to control the number of day trippers, the local government has banned unauthorized coach trips. And people arriving by car may be turned away if they have not pre-booked parking. And from 2021, cruise ships were banned from Venice. And from June 1st, 2024, tour groups are limited to 25 people and loudspeakers will be banned. So, what about sustainable tourism? Sustainable tourism meets the needs of the present without compromising the needs of future generations. Sustainable tourism needs to maintain biodiversity, involve local people, use resources sustainably, and reduce overconsumption. So, ecotourism is often called green tourism, and to be ecotourism, it must be sustainable. And ecotourism is rapidly growing. It can take place in a variety of environments, but it's usually in remote areas. And it's related to tourism that protects and benefits ecology, such as coral reefs, forests, parks, and lakes. And conservation must also allow for local people to make a profit from the tourism. So, a case study of ecotourism is Gambia. So, Gambia is the smallest country in mainland Africa, and Gambia extends the Gambia River extends almost 300 miles into the interior and is surrounded by Senegal. So, Gambia's climate is wet and dry, and its population is home to 9 different indigenous groups, and 2/3 of the population is under 30, and they are predominantly a Muslim country. And the Gambian environment, there are nearly 600 species of birds in the country, and the country is known for its smallest beaches along the Atlantic coastline. And for tourism experienced a very short decline after a military coup in the 1990s, but it is now a very important industry. And Footsteps is an adult-only eco-lodge, which is located 45 minutes south of the main tourist area. So, the Eco Lodge was built in 2002, and its electricity to the accommodation is provided by solar energy, and you have composting toilets, you have water supplies from tube wells, and the Eco Lodge aims to be plastic-free, including no plastic straws available for drinks or plastic wrap, and food is sourced locally, so fruiting trees are planted around the accommodation, and no pesticides are used. So, oh yes, this is Recon Beacons, which is another example of rural tourism, and it's a dark sky status, and it has a varied landscape of glaciated valleys and moorland. It covers an area of 1,344 square kilometers, and the management of the area includes several management strategies, which include sustainable travel options, planning powers to control light from new development, creation of community-based hubs, and there's also focus on ecosystem regeneration, which includes woodland expansion and restoration of rivers. So, what about social media? International tourist arrivals worldwide reached 1.4 billion in 2018, and the rapid growth of the worldwide tourism industry is due to economic growth, disposable income, increased leisure time, so on and so forth. However, the effects of COVID-19 seriously limited growth in tourism because of the international lockdowns. However, tourism figures are expected to grow, and an expected 1.8 billion tourists are expected to make some form of trip by 2030. So this is a graph of the expected forecasts for the future. And what is the impact of social media? Social media has changed how people now research trips and how they use apps such as Instagram to record their experiences. And according to recent statistics, 48% of people now choose a destination based on what they see on Instagram. And over 35% of respondents discover new places on Instagram. And there are over 1 billion visitors to Instagram each month. And of course, TripAdvisor was founded in 2000, and poor reviews on TripAdvisor can also damage a small business. What about international security? So international security can be a deterrent for tourist destinations. There has been a global increase in travel safety. Tourism is, of course, safer than it has ever been. And after the 9/11 attacks in the USA, it showed why there is a need for safer travel. And after it, it was estimated that the city of New York lost $83 billion. However, in some other countries, there's a huge disparity between wealthy tourists and people with low income, and this can cause friction. However, conflict can also take place when tourist behaviors differ from that of the host country. And of course, you also have diaspora growth. Diaspora tourism is a form of niche tourism, which includes people in diaspora communities traveling to the areas the country they or their families migrated from. And diaspora tourism may include visiting friends and family. Of course, you also have the Africa Heritage Diaspora Tourism Trail, which was formed by UNESCO, and it's a part of an international effort to document and highlight the history of slavery. And many countries now offer AHDTT organized trips, including Bermuda, the Gambia, and Ghana. And you also have cemetery tourism, which focuses on tourism around people researching their family tree. And diaspora tourism is less affected by economic recession because people will visit all year round. You also have international agreements because governments are encouraging people to increase their sporting activity for several reasons, such as for health and to boost their economies. However, it's difficult to identify clear economic benefits from hosting international sporting events, and some sports events is short term. And for example, Qatar is a country that is trying to increase sports participation. However, unfortunately, sports continue to be tainted by match fixing, corruption, and drug scandals. And participation in international sports is used by countries to demonstrate a country's success. And sport may also be used as a tool for diplomacy. And cooperation between countries can be increased through sporting events. And international sporting events increase freedom of movement between countries. And inclusion, and there's also inclusion and changing gender roles. Inclusion in sports is used to refer to the involvement in sports of people who are not traditionally involved. For example, in England, women's football was popular in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And the current global labor force participation rate for women is unfortunately just under 47%. And in many countries, such as the USA, nearly all women work, and single professional women have more disposable income to be able to participate in leisure activities. Single women also are more likely to actively participate in sport compared to married women, and religion may also impact the participation of different genders in sport. For example, the religion of Islam promotes good health and well-being for both men and women. Muslim women may face difficulties because they cannot participate in mixed gender sports. And in a 2022 UK survey, 97% of Muslim women in England wanted to increase their current sport participation. And other barriers to sports for women includes dress code, parental approval, childcare, lack of role models, and also time. And although there have been some improvements, there is still a gap of pay between men and women in sports. And what are the importance of Paralympics? The Paralympic Games is an international competition for athletes who have disabilities, and the first official Paralympics took place in the 1960s. And since 1988, the Olympic and Paralympic Games have been held in the city and at the same venues. And originally, the Paralympic Games were just for wheelchair users, but in 1976 expanded to include other disabilities. And in 2016, there were 4,300 participants representing 159 nations, and athletes from HICs are most likely to participate as a result of the cost associated with competing. And there we are for content. Awesome. So does anyone have any questions for content as we finish, as we're done? We're done with the content. Does anyone have any questions? All right, I think everyone's fine. I hope everyone's fine. Do you have any questions about? If you have any further questions, you could just let me know, since no one has any right now. But I will be sharing this to the group chat in case you want to study the case studies for later. Let me download it, and you can always message me if you have any questions about option E, and I'll make sure to. If you want, I'll make sure to go over paper 1 once I finish talking about option F, and I can talk about how I would approach the 3 options I would do as I'm a geography HL student. What do we think? I think once I finish option F, I'll be more inclined to do like discuss paper 1 as a whole. What does everyone think about that? I hope I can get to that by next week. But yeah. And if no one has any questions, thank you all for coming. I know it was lots of talk, but thank you all for being here, and I hope it